We're going to get going. So, all right, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. You can find my videos on YouTube. You can catch the audio on Spotify, Apple, all the podcast providers under my name, Yossi Goslin. And as the bottom suggests, you can follow, subscribe to my newsletter, Third Apron. And we've got some news to discuss, some significant changes. Usually it comes this time of year whenever there are some teams ending their season. The Pelicans have fired executive David Griffin after 6 years, and the Phoenix Suns have fired Mike Budenholzer after just 1 year. And with me to discuss the news, to examine its implications, I brought back CBS's Sam Quinn, their NBA writer. So Sam, both of these have been heavily rumored over the weekend. I think we'll mostly have a lot more to say on the Pelican stuff. There's a lot of stuff already starting to develop from this development just since the firing was announced. Any initial thoughts on these?
I feel like we're on a nice little streak here of guys getting fired who are actually pretty good at their jobs, right? Like, I think Taylor Jenkins is a good coach. I think Michael Malone is a good coach. We can leave Calvin Booth aside. I think Mike Budenholzer is probably a pretty good coach. He won a championship. And I think David Griffin is probably a pretty good GM. And I think in a lot of these cases, it's a combination of circumstance and just how high expectations seem to be, where for a lot of these teams, it's like, if you don't come in right away and contend, if you're not on a linear upward trajectory, we're going to get rid of you. Now, the circumstances for each of them are different. I think Budenholzer is probably the logical place to start. I think he's the bigger name. My general philosophy here is, and like, look, you can say that he was a problem, and I think there was evidence that clearly it wasn't working in that locker room. I think if every year we are hearing that a different coach is losing the same locker room, the problem is probably the locker room and not the coach, right? Like, I don't know. At a certain point, if you keep firing coaches over and over again, I don't think the coach is the problem. I think it's the circumstances you're putting the coach in. I think Mike Budenholzer is a good coach, and I think some more patient, frankly, better run team is going to hire him in the next year or two and be much happier with him than the Suns were. The Griffin situation is more complicated. We can get into some of the nuances there. But my initial reaction with Budenholzer is like, good for you, man. You get paid for 5 years of work, and you're there for 8 months or whatever it is.
Yeah, one of my initial reactions is that getting the Suns head coaching job, probably the most attractive job, knowing that you might just get off the hook for like immediately. Now 2 years in a row, 3 years in a row, I suppose, because Monty. So I had Gerald Bourguet of PHNX. We were talking about the Suns offseason on Friday, right after they got eliminated, and we touched on the coaching situation. He fully expected this to happen. This was something that a lot of the Suns writers were expecting to happen, and they're still paying Vogel now. I think he had a 4-year deal. They're paying now Budenholzer. He's got like a 4 or 5 year deal. The biggest difference is that Monty, he's not getting paid by the Suns anymore because there's like no double dipping with coaching salaries, sort of. So like the Pistons are paying him whatever
they Gore's problem now.
Him. Yeah. So like the Monty firing definitely worked out for the Suns. We'll see about these two. I agree. I think Mike Budenholzer is a pretty good coach. He obviously, the Suns couldn't accomplish what they really brought him in for. The big criticism on Bud has been his lack of adjustments in the playoffs, but they couldn't even get there. Like, he was brought in to at least raise the floor in the regular season, and I don't think he was, he's not the problem. There's definitely a lot of things you could point to about the rotations, playing certain guys over others that played into the situation. It's just one of the problems, but I don't even know if Budenholzer is like the third or fourth biggest problem that what happened to the Suns this year. So I agree with you.
Bad. Yeah, it's kind of that simple. They're a bad team, right? It's really like that. Like I was doing, we were doing end of season grades, CBS Sports, and the Suns are one of the teams that I did. And I think when you look at disasters of this scale, it's generally because somebody got hurt, or because some bad trade was made, or for some reason or another, Kyrie with the vaccine mandate, you don't have the team that you wanted. And that's not what happened with the Suns. they had the team that they wanted. That team was just bad.
Yep. No, the team was just not good enough. I don't think their best players were good enough to the level they needed to be. I think those are the top reasons ultimately why the Suns, why this happened. But look, if you want to, I could see organizationally why you might want to sell it to the fans like, okay, we just fired this guy, he's one of the major problems, to give the fans some hope that things are going to change. And everyone seems to be anticipating a lot of big changes, probably on the roster, possibly even in the front office. Or I saw how I guess James Jones's deal, he's expiring, some uncertainty what's going to happen there. So yeah, it seems like there's going to be a lot of changes, just a lot of shuffling again. The Suns have probably made the most significant changes on a year-by-year basis over the past 2 years. Just like each year, it's like something like there's always something significantly different about what they're doing. And yeah, this just kind of continues with the trend of how they've been managing things. So we'll see. I mean, quickly, any names you have in mind you like for this team? Well, it's kind of hard to say because we don't even know what exactly the team's going to look like.
Well, yeah, I don't know who actually, that's a lie. I do know who the GM is going to be. The GM is going to be Matt Ishbia. So, like, that's kind of irrelevant. I think they'll probably try to hire another famous guy, right? Like, this screams throw a lot of money at Michael Malone, or I guess to a lesser extent, Taylor Jenkins, or see if Tom Thibodeau gets fired in New York, although Bradley Beal and Tom Thibodeau is about as, oil and vinegar, or not vinegar. What doesn't oil mix with? It's oil and something. I don't know, but you get the point. I think if Thibodeau got Bradley Beal, Beal might be in a full body cast by December. I think they'll go for a big name because that's what Ishbia tends to do. If I were them, I would be thinking on a longer time horizon. I'd probably just say, let's go interview. Well, first of all, let's go hire a real GM. Let's go hire somebody who we can trust to oversee the entire organization and let that guy pick his coach. But I'd be thinking, let's get somebody we think is going to be a good head coach in a couple of years. Let's not rush just because we think, oh, we're all in. We have to be. My philosophy here is, either we've talked about this in private or we've talked about it on the show. I think they should just tear it all down. Don't just trade Durant, trade Booker too, trade everything that isn't nailed down because they don't have it. It's not going to happen. Kevin Durant getting traded is obvious. Can I share my recent Kevin Durant trade fixation with you?
All right.
3-team trade. This depends on Oklahoma City not winning the championship, to be clear. Kevin Durant goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Isaiah Hartenstein, Alex Caruso, and whatever other cap filler go to the New York Knicks. And Karl Anthony Towns goes to the Phoenix Suns. What say you, Yossi Goslin?
It's just shuffling. That's all the Suns could do because they're not going to rebuild. They can't really rebuild. I got into the complications of that, where even if they do a trade with the Rockets, get their picks back, they still have swaps on the even numbered years, so they can't reasonably rebuild. So yeah, this is a type of thing they'd probably do, where I could see them just trying to get a different flavor of an all-star, just to see if anything just creates some winning formula. I was thinking, I just posted my Sixers preview today on Third Apron. I was talking about, if Paul George continues to decline, if he doesn't get anywhere close to the form he was, maybe there's a Paul George, Bradley Beal type of trade that both teams can consider, mainly for the Sixers to just get a little earlier cap flexibility, because Beal's contract is 1 year shorter than George's. And then for the Suns, you're just mixing things up a little bit. You don't know if the team's getting better or not. You're just trying to see if this will work, if there's just something that will work. So that's all it seems like they could really do, just kind of shuffle things up. Yeah, I could see something kind of like that, where if the Knicks do want to switch things up from Towns, yeah, I'm sure the Suns would be very interested in him.
Well, here's my real argument here. Remember, this was 3-4 years ago at this point, the Slam magazine cover of Booker, Karl Towns, and D'Angelo Russell, and they said we're all going to play together at one point. Phoenix seems to be so fixated on we're just going to make Devin Booker happy and that's all that matters. Go get his buddy and then go get D'Angelo Russell in free agency. It's not going to be expensive. So go get him and just be like, we're going to unite the not-so-super friends. The Knicks just get a total redo on losing Hartenstein, which they had no control over anyway, And if they get Caruso in the deal, all the better. They have to get somebody else just for cat matching. So that's my argument there. As far as Philly goes, the other one that I could kind of see, maybe not Paul George for Bradley Beal, maybe Paul George, the lottery pick, and some other stuff for Kevin Durant. And Philly goes with Maxey, Durant, and Embiid, and I have to include him in this sentence now, Quentin Grimes.
I mean, that would be amazing for the Suns if they can get a top pick in this draft for Kevin Durant. I don't think they could have asked for anything better.
Yeah, you're not getting one, but if it's like 5 or 6, then yeah, you could talk about that. Yeah,
and maybe Paul George can just continue where he left off with the Clippers, and that might end up being a pretty good. That'd be, I think, a great return for the Suns if they could do that. But no, I think, I don't have too much else on the Suns. I would just say, as far as like who the next guy could be, nowadays I kind of like, whenever I think of who a team would look to next if they were to move on from their current coach, I always like to think, hey, why don't you look from within? And that's been a very successful trend with the Thunder after going from Billy Donovan to Mark Daigneault. The Celtics going, they would have probably kept Udoka, but going from him to Joe Mazzulla had that controversy not happen. And I think for most teams, especially in I just feel like that's a good thing to look at. And now the Suns had a guy, remember? I think his name was Kevin Young. He went to BYU.
He's at BYU right now.
He seemed like
coaching the BYU Utah Jazz.
Yeah, he seemed like a guy who was destined to, like, it seemed like he was like a strong consideration to play for the Suns. And now that he left there, things have, I don't know how much, maybe you can point to that as like another reason things kind of fell apart systematically. But maybe there's someone from within, because I don't think there's really that many big names out there that really scream as like a logical fit. And just knowing how uncertain things are going to be over the next few years, especially next season, if you're not guaranteed to be good, like, why not get someone to invest in, getting someone young that you could see there being long term? I don't know who that is. I don't, I'm not familiar with any of the names on the coaching staff, but I would probably lean towards somebody new who does not have any like big head coaching experience yet.
Well, I'll throw out a name. This is going to serve as a perfect segue for us here. What about Willie Green, who was an assistant under Monty Williams in Phoenix, clearly had a productive relationship with Devin Booker at least, and we don't know who Joe Dumars is going to want to keep as coach. My instinct, and this has nothing to do with Joe Dumars and everything to do with how cheap the Pelicans are, is that they're going to keep Willie Green because they just don't want to fire a coach and still pay him. So I suspect Willie Green will be back in New Orleans, but like, there was a lot of Chauncey Billups buzz in Phoenix in the past. He extended in Portland. I do think there's something to, they might like having a player as their former head coach. The last two have been, not NBA players, Frank Vogel and Mike Budenholzer. So Willie Green makes some sense. He's obviously already been with the organization, and we don't really know what his future is going to be. I suspect he'll be back, but it's entirely possible the Pelicans let him go.
Yeah, we will see what happens. I can't think that Joe Dumars, and who's like the lead frontrunner, and Willie Green, I'm not sure if they've intersected in any way, like as an exec to player. I don't know. I'd have to check. But I don't know. I don't know how that's going to play out. For them, I also don't see a coaching candidate that really sticks out where, maybe you got to make some type of move. But so that's a good transition to the Pelicans, though, because I think this is where we're going to have the most to talk about. So I already commented on this morning on Twitter, cited my Pelicans offseason preview, because there has been some smoke in the previous months about David Griffin's job security in New Orleans. And I'm one of the last big Griffin defenders out there, it seems.
I'm with you on that.
So I'm going to go over, I just put together his resume in his 6 years with the Pelicans. I just want to kind of go over the big things he did. Definitely some hit and misses, but I think mostly hits. So he started in 2019. First big move he did with the Anthony Davis trade. Acquired Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, 4th overall selection in 2019, 2 additional firsts, 1 in 2022, and another set to convey this year, but they don't have it. They already traded it to the Hawks. Then he drafted Zion Williamson, which was mainly a stroke of luck to be in that position. And then some misses in the rest of that draft and in 2020. Also traded Drew Holiday for, at the time, I really liked it, getting 2 future Buck swaps, like very far out, and two first and 2 swaps that are like conveying now, finally. But they haven't yielded any amazing value. The Bucks haven't had any demise. This is like slowly, they're having a slow decline, but for the most part, Giannis is still there. So it hasn't yielded any like amazing results. But then, in my mind, he started batting pretty close to 100 with his subsequent mainly draft moves. He traded in 2021. He traded down 7 spots to get a lot of cap flexibility in a deal with the Grizzlies. So getting off Bledsoe's contract, getting off Steven Adams' big contract, and then they were still in position to draft Trey Murphy. Not only that, in that same draft, they had to use a 2nd-round pick on Herb Jones and signed Jose Alvarado as an undrafted free agent. They also just right before found Najee Marshall as an undrafted free agent. Then in 2022, Lakers had that catastrophic season that gave the Pelicans the 8th pick to select Dyson Daniels, and I'm sure we'll get to that one a little later. They traded one of those Bucks picks to get CJ McCollum, which I think was good value in the vacuum. It's just like the extension afterwards that kind of messed things up. And then to top things off, drafted Jordan Hawkins 2023, Yves Missi 2024. And then the big move that may have kind of been a catalyst for today's decision, trading Dyson Daniels and the remaining pick from the Lakers and Bucks that they had in their pipeline to get DeJounte Murray. And then over these past 6 seasons, only 2 playoff appearances, both as 8 seeds, I believe just 2 wins. And this season had a lot of high expectations, but like I just look at this resume and it just, I'm sure we'll get more follow-up reporting about like what kind of played into the decision. We haven't had that much into it. So I'm really going to be curious to hear what it is. But if we don't hear any like specific details of maybe how it was internally, then to me, it just kind of seems that he was a victim of these injuries. These injuries have predated Griffin since like the beginning of the Anthony Davis era, when they had guys like when they had Drew Holiday and like Tyreek Evans and Eric Gordon, that era. So many of these guys were injured, and like it was across the roster. Like this epidemic of injuries the Pelicans have, it's like a decade plus thing. And I don't know what else what David Griffin could have done to salvage this injury situation. So, I think for the most part, just he has the attribute. His front office has the attribute that like a small market team like the Pelicans absolutely needs, which is scouting, identifying players at the draft. And I think there's a lot of risk not having that anymore. So that's why I'm kind of afraid of how things are going to look for the Pelicans going forward.
Yeah, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth, right? Like they have been among the best drafting teams in the NBA basically for the past 5 years. I thought the 19 draft after Zion, they kind of botched. There was all that reporting around that draft that when they got the 4 pick from the Lakers, they were totally committed to trading down, which is just a weird sentiment in the NBA where like, why aren't you just staying at 4 and taking Darius Garland? Why are you overthinking this? They take Jackson Hayes, which is a miss, and then they take Alexander Walker, which would have been a hit, but they gave up on him too early. Ever since then, basically, the drafting has been almost impeccable. You went through all of the picks. They've generally been good, the undrafted free agents. I think the DeJounte Murray trade didn't work out. Otherwise, I think the trades have largely been good too, where like, I think the CJ trade is a good example where they actually structured that trade really creatively. They already owed a protected portion of that pick. I think it was from like the Devontae Graham trade. Like they already owed part of that pick. And then they
traded the first twice.
Yes, exactly. Like that's a really creative bit of trading, and it's something that I really like to see out of teams. And did they wind up keeping it even, or it was still top 4 protected, right? Like the Blazers got it 5-14.
So
And
from
then
I
I can't remember
think
what the specifics
I
were.
think that I think I remember the details. So essentially, they got that pick from no, they traded a pick to the Hornets to get Devontae Graham. They traded it with like I believe top 15 protection,
Yeah.
and then they traded the bottom half protection again to the Blazers as part of the CJ McCollum trade. So they ended up making the playoffs. So the pick went to the Hornets. So because the Blazers didn't get the 2022 selection, then instead they got the Bucks pick in 2025.
Gotcha. Yeah, but that's still a very creative construction of a trade. Now losing Josh Hart in that, knowing what Josh Hart would become, that does hurt. But like CJ got them into the playoffs that year. They overpaid on the extension, but I thought that was like generally a pretty smart trade. The real issue here has been the injuries, and you laid it out. It's not just this era. It's not even just the Anthony Davis era, right? Like you want to go back, early Chris Paul had durability issues. Now, Chris Paul had durability issues throughout his career, but like you go back through like Baron Davis, even like all the way back to when they first moved to New Orleans, there were a lot of guys on those teams that weren't staying healthy. And my contention has always been like, they're kind of just cheap in a lot of ways as an organization. They went out when they hired David Griffin. It's Aaron Nelson that they hired from Phoenix, right? The trainer from the 7 seconds or less Suns, thinking like, oh, this will fix the medical issues. For whatever reason, it hasn't. I don't know exactly what goes into their training program or if they're just really unlucky. But I think if you really distill this down to the core essence, if Zion Williamson had stayed healthy and everything else had stayed the same, they're probably pretty consistently a 50-win team most years. And David Griffin is not fired. And maybe there's a year where everything else breaks right and you win 57 games and you're a 2 seed and you maybe make a real run and get to the finals or something, right? This really boils down to the fact that they got the number one pick in a year in which there was a very obvious number one pick player, and that number one pick player hasn't stayed healthy. Ingram, it's whatever. I've seen a lot of like post hoc analysis on that where people say, oh, he held on to him too long. Well, nobody was really clamoring for him to trade Brandon Ingram in 2022, right? Like, okay, was his trade value higher at certain points? Sure. I don't think anybody really saw where that was going, and that was also partially a function of the CBA as well, where I don't think the teams knew how punitive that was going to be. So I look at the moves themselves and I just say DeJounte Murray didn't work out. I saw the logic there. The one thing I'll say is that I think it was a little irresponsible of them to make that trade before they had an Ingram trade lined up, because I think the logic was that we're going to trade for Murray. He's going to do a lot of the mid-range shot making, the late game creation stuff that Ingram does, and then we're going to trade Ingram for a center because they didn't have one. They lost Jonas, they lost Larry Nance. I think not getting that Ingram trade done was part of what did them in, right? Well, obviously Murray tearing the Achilles was part of that, and he played really badly for them before that too. That would be the one thing I would point to and say, like, based on what DeJounte Murray was in Atlanta, I don't think the trade they made was like crazy, right? Like I thought it was pretty much in line with what he was worth. It's kind of what they were asking for at the deadline last year, right? It was like 2 firsts and a good player. Dyson Daniels has been better than I thought he was going to be. I don't have a problem with the trade itself. I have a problem with the mechanics around it, where you keep Ingram and you go into the season without a center. I'm just generally of the opinion here, and I'm talking circles, it's just if Zion stays healthy, we're having a different conversation, but he didn't stay healthy, right? Like, if Zion stays healthy and you have Trey Murphy on a below market contract and Herb Jones on a below market contract and these other assets you could do stuff with, maybe it had been Murray, somebody else, whatever, we're having a different conversation.
And I think everyone expected the Pelicans to be good, like onward from 2022 after they made the playoffs, especially after they gave the Suns such a hard time in that series. I think the expectation was the Pelicans are finally here. They're going to start to be a playoff team consistently. And it was just the injuries that did them. Do you know what their over or under was for this season, 24-25?
Sorry, I just got a message from work. Say that again.
Do you know what their Vegas over under was for this season?
It was like 47.5, right?
Yeah, it was like basically that. So even in this very crowded West, everyone was thinking the Pelicans should have been good if they're healthy. That's the big caveat. And this was their most injured season, probably even in their past, like the entire past decade when they've been having some really big injured seasons. So, so you bring up two things that you can possibly like really nitpick into why the Pelicans could have made this decision. With the Ingram trade, we'll just never really know what happened. And usually a lot of the time whenever there's an all-star like Ingram gets traded, there could be a lot of subsequent reporting like, oh, they could have gotten this for him or this team would have offered this. And I haven't really heard much of that at all about Ingram, which kind of tells me, yeah, there really just wasn't such a strong market, which I think kind of checks out. Nothing against Ingram, but as talented as he is, he's just a very difficult player to slot on most teams. Like even on the Pelicans, it just was not a clean fit with Zion long term. And it was pretty obvious once Trey Murphy really started showing what he's going to become, that he was going to be Ingram was going to be on the way out eventually. It's just a matter of when and if they can get the right return. So maybe they could have gotten more earlier, but we'll just never know. But how much more? Like if it was a 2024 offseason back when the Sixers had a lot of cap space, if they didn't get Paul George, like, are they really going to get, were the Sixers really going to give up more stuff to get him? Were they even interested in him at all?
The big one was Durant, right? The big one was 2023 or 22, the first summer that Durant wanted out of Brooklyn, where we were having the conversations of like, should Toronto give up Scotty Barnes? And if they should, that's a good trade for Brooklyn. Should New Orleans give up Brandon Ingram? And like looking at it back now, I guess without knowing Zion's health, that would have been irresponsible. But like, I think people sort of got it in their head that Ingram was the sort of trade asset that you could turn into like a high-end all-star, which just obviously didn't turn out to be the case. I think Ingram is also just a kind of player that's out of fashion in the NBA now, right? Where like there was a time where the like B+ tough shot maker was seen as very, very valuable. But now we're in this world where like nobody wants DeMar DeRozan, right? Like nobody wants Julius Randle. If you're not going to be either a real like shot creator, somebody who gets to the lane or makes life easier for teammates in some substantial way, or a very good defender, you're just not going to be super valuable unless you're like an upper tier shot maker, like a Durant. Or even Devin Booker is kind of borderline right now, right? We're like, I know Phoenix doesn't want to trade him and we're not really going to get to gauge his trade value. I don't think Devin Booker is worth nearly as much as some people think at this stage. So like, I think creation now is just generally treated as much more valuable than shot making. And Devin Booker or Brandon Ingram is not a shot creator. He's a shot maker.
Yeah. I think, DeMar DeRozan is the exact comparison when you think about like, okay, the Raptors lucked out. They were able to get Kawhi for him, but then the Spurs, they just kind of got a first for him that they ended up trading back to the Bulls later. Bulls didn't really get anything for DeMar and the sign and trade on the way out.
Well, the Spurs got something on the way out.
Yeah,
the Spurs got the King swap because dumping cap space was more valuable than getting DeMar DeRozan.
No, but it's possible that trade kind of just then completely changed the perception in the exact way you just described about how shot creation is more valuable than difficult shot making now. So I just don't think they were ever going to get that much more for Ingram. So, but then the Dyson Daniels thing. So I agree that the process of the DeJounte Murray trade is fine. I think that based on how DeJounte Murray was playing last year, that's kind of, based on what Dyson Daniels had done up until that point and those additional picks, I think that was fine value. I think DeJounte Murray was like exactly the type of guard, especially on that contract, that made a lot of sense for the Pelicans. I'm not going to, nitpick on that because Murray ended up getting injured later. But I suppose just with Daniels, because they drafted him, which was a good selection. And I just don't think they really used him properly. They were kind of using him as a primary on-ball creator. And that's just not what he should be doing. And when you look at who else they had, like their main lineup was already set. I could understand why they eventually came to the conclusion that, okay, we should, if we're going to move one of our guys to get a point guard, okay, move Daniels. I just think like that's the one thing you can criticize where their evaluation of Daniels ended up being wrong because how they used them in his first 2 years, they got to the wrong conclusion. And, I'll just say that if Daniels still had the season he had and DeJounte stayed healthy and he stayed fine, like he was pretty, like almost everyone on the Pelicans had a down year this year, except for Trey Murphy. His usage went up and he stayed about the same. Zion finally started getting closer to his peak form as the season progressed, but like almost everyone across the board had a down year, including DeJounte Murray. He was like pretty horrible in the beginning part. Just another thing where that the trade was still going to look bad, even if DeJounte Murray stayed healthy. But if he didn't tear his ACL, his Achilles, does that change the perception of the trade? I just think it's a lot of hindsight where you couldn't really control that type of injury. And that may have caused that may have been a big catalyst in the decision today. So I'm sure we'll get more follow-up reporting, but that's just kind of like my take on the whole process of that move.
Dyson was not in a good situation there, just given the personnel that they had, where he didn't really get to shine defensively because Herb Jones always had the hardest matchup. So it wasn't like we were watching these Pelican games, and he had a pretty big role for a decent stretch last year when there were some injuries where he was playing a lot more. We weren't looking at him like, wow, Dyson Daniels is shutting down these all-stars. We were looking at Herb Jones doing that, and we didn't really get a reasonable approximation of his value, and he wasn't on the ball as much, so he wasn't generating these bonkers steals numbers that he has this year. So, like, we didn't really understand. We knew he had a lot of good defensive tools. That's what he was drafted based on, but we couldn't have really known what he was going to become. And then offensively, the reason they were using him as like an on-ball creator was that he's not a good shooter. And there's just not much you can really do with a guy like that. He's just gotten a lot better this year at just about everything on offense. So that's made it a lot easier for Atlanta. But I think they were just looking at Dyson and saying, well, he can't shoot. So the only thing we can really do with him is give him the ball. And he was just not ready for that at that point. So, yeah, I'm with you on this. Like, I think that the process of the trade was fine. And you brought up the Murray contract. It looks bad right now because of the Achilles. A year ago, the DeJounte Murray contract looked great. It's 4 years, like 128. Am I right? Like 32 a year?
Yeah, like 30 something a year, a little over 30 a
For
year.
a plus starter at point guard that can defend up, that like is bigger, that's incredible value, right? Like for what we thought DeJounte Murray was. And at a time where like there are guys who are like just by virtue of where they were drafted or what team they're on that are getting paid an extra $20 million a year who just like aren't that much better than him. Like, I'll put it this way. If you would have asked me a year ago, would you rather have DeJounte at 32 a year or Trae Young at 52? I would have taken DeJounte.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. So I'll just leave it at this where you could make a case that even without these significant injuries, which completely derailed this window, that you can make a case, okay, maybe this front office was, you don't trust the front office to make the moves necessary to take the Pelicans to the next level. Like you can argue that sort of thing, but ultimately what I fall down on is that for a small market team like the Pelicans, and drafting, scouting is having a front office that can hit on those things. Having those attributes is just like the most important thing I think a small market team can have in a front office. If they don't have that and the next regime also isn't getting them to, the playoff contention area they want to be, then I don't know. It just kind of feels like they might be reverting back to like the Dempsey era when like they just kind of like pushed pick after pick for some short-sighted moves, and it didn't really get anywhere. Other than like one playoff appearance, one good playoff series win.
You bring up a good point with small market teams needing to be able to hit on the margins and draft well. And this is another very good segue. I'm going to ask you to clear the lane for me because I'm about to cook. They're probably going to hire Joe Dumars. By all accounts, Joe Dumars is the front runner to get this job. And I think some people out there have this idea that Joe Dumars is this like winning GM, this champion because of the 2004 Pistons. And like, let's put Darko aside for a second. Like, ignore his greatest failure as a GM, which is choosing Darko Milicic over Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade. Put that aside. I'm going to take you now through everything Joe Dumars did as GM of the Pistons after the 2004 championship. It's bad, and it spans a full decade. His first round picks, Jason Maxfield at 26, decent pick, but at the same position 4 picks later is David Lee. Rodney Stuckey at 15, low-end starter. Aaron Aflalo at 27, like, okay, good role player, like, fine pick. Austin Day at 15. Drew Holiday goes 17, Jeff Teague goes 19. Not great. Greg Monroe at 7. Gordon Hayward goes 9. Paul George goes 10. Brandon Knight at 8. Kemba Walker goes 9. Klay Thompson goes 11. Kawhi Leonard goes 15. Andre Drummond at 9. Not much after that. Fine. Contavious Caldwell-Pope at 8. CJ McCollum at 10. Giannis Antetokounmpo at 15. Those are the draft picks. They're not good. I'll give Joe Dumars this. He did hit very big on 1 second-round pick. You know who that second-round pick was? Chris Middleton. Do you know what he did with Chris Middleton? He traded him in a sign-and-trade a year later with Brandon Knight to bring back Brandon Jennings. And that's just the beginning of some of the awful trades that Joe Dumars made in this decade-long period. November 2008, Chauncey Billups, Antonio McDyess, and Cheek Sam for Allen Iverson takes the team that had just made the Eastern Conference Finals to 39-43. Okay, the whole idea of that trade was we're going to clear out a bunch of cap space and we are going to fix our team in the offseason. They signed Ben Gordon, 5 years, $55 million, and Charlie Villanueva, 5 years, $40 million. Neither contract aged very well. June 2009, Amir Johnson for Fabricio Oberto. That might not seem like an important trade. I do want to point out Amir Johnson goes to Toronto and is one of the best bench players in the NBA for like 4 or 5 years after that. Aaron Aflalo for a second-round pick. Aaron Aflalo was a good starter for like 7, 8 years after this, and he gets Vernon Macklin in return. 2012, he trades Ben Gordon and a 2014 first-round pick for Corey Maggette. Corey Maggette played 18 games as a Piston and then retired. That number 8, that pick that they got, or they gave up rather, it was number 8 overall. Now, it was Noah Vonleh, but a number 8 overall pick is very valuable. It's more valuable than 18 games of Corey Maggette. The coach hires Flip Saunders. Good hire. Fine. You fire him after the Eastern Conference Finals? It's a little bit strange to me. Michael Curry, 1 year, 39-43. John Kuester, 2 years, 57-107. This is a side note. I went down a research rabbit hole on this. Do you know that the Pistons mutinied against John Kuester? They boycotted a shoot-around. Or rather,
I remember that.
They planned to boycott a shoot-around, but were told in private that Kuester was going to be fired. So they showed up to that shoot-around. Then Kuester wasn't fired. So they wound up boycotting a different shoot-around. There's footage of Kuester getting ejected from a game and the bench laughing at him. Like, that's how bad this got. Finally, they fired John Kuester. Lawrence Frank, 54-94, fired after 2 years. Mo Cheeks, 21-29, fired after 50 games. That's 5 head coaches that he hired after Larry Brown won in the championship. We've gone over some of the contracts that he's given out. I've got a few more for you here. Ben Wallace leaves. I think this is 2006. He gives Nazr Mohammed a 5-year, $30 million full mid-level deal to replace him. He's traded midway through the second season of that. And the cherry on top, quietly one of the worst contracts of the 21st century in the NBA. Josh Smith, 4 years, $54 million, is so bad as a Piston that he gets waived and stretched in the second season, and they have to pay off that money for the next 7 years. This is an apocalyptically bad stretch as a general manager. This is a full decade, mind you. This is not 2 or 3 years. This is not David Kahn. This is not Nico Harrison, where it's brief and contained. This is 10 full years. So you might be asking yourself, okay, what did Joe Dumars do after that? Well, in 2019, he joins the Sacramento Kings because that notable GM factory in Sacramento is where you want to be hiring for. Now, he missed a lot of the worst of Vlade Divac, but I do want to point out that he was in the building when they traded Tyrese Halliburton for Domantas Sabonis, which I don't think was a good trade in ideation or in execution. He was in the building for several more years of their lottery streak continuing. Did they draft anyone especially notable? Okay, they drafted De'Aaron Fox. He was the obvious pick at number 5. Everywhere else didn't really get much accomplished. Finally goes to the league office. He's been at the league office for, I think, 3 years now, kind of doing the image rehab thing that I think a lot of failed GMs do. And I guess somehow using the relationships and the contacts you get when you work at the league office to squirrel his way back into a GM job. But, like, I truly, in the time I've been covering the NBA, I don't think I've ever been lower on a GM hire than I am Joe Dumars in 2025. I'm speechless that a team would make this decision. Like, what is the appeal? What are you looking at and saying, like, this is what Joe Dumars is going to bring to us? Because for the past 20 years, everywhere he's gone, disaster has followed.
Yeah, so I'm just scrolling through his basketball reference page as an executive as you're listing all this stuff, just so I kind of, have it all written down in front of me. A lot of these coaching ones, I completely forgot. Like, I remember the Custer boycott thing. That was that was crazy. Like, I'm never going to forget that. But afterward, yeah, like, I don't even remember Lawrence Frank, that he was a coach. I don't remember that Mo Cheeks was a coach. Like, those last 5 years of his tenure, like, the Pistons, arguably maybe the most irrelevant team, like, at that time. It's like, just like, they've been one of, I would say, like, between like 2009 to like 20, like, right before they select Cade, I guess even right before Blake Griffin, because Blake Griffin at least kind of made things exciting. Like, the team with the least identity, basically throughout the 2010s. Like, when you try to think of the Pistons and what sticks out for most of the 2010s, it's like mostly Drummond, a little bit of Brandon Knight, a little bit of Brandon Jennings, like very little bit of Brandon Jennings, until he unfortunately tore his Achilles. Yeah, I'll just, putting it nicely, I'm very uninspired by this edition. I don't know what to expect. I don't know how this is how they're gonna progress exactly. But if things don't go well, if they're not progressing, like, getting to the place they want to be, if they don't have that edge in scouting and identifying young players, then yeah, I'm very fearful for what's going to come next.
What a big loss it turned out to be that Trajan Langdon got the Pistons job a year ago, because if he hadn't, you have to assume Trajan Langdon would be getting this job now. And he's done a very good job with Detroit so far, I think. Now, I think the moves have been more subtle than maybe what people are suggesting, right? Like, I don't think the roster overhaul was really that huge. I think what really happened more than anything with them jumping from 14 to 40 whatever wins was that the young players got better and they went from the worst coach in the NBA to, like, a fine average coach. I don't think, but generally he did well around the margins. He got them into the playoffs, and more than anything, he's not Joe Dumars, right? Like, I don't have this giant sheet of bad moves in front of me for Trajan Langdon. I have them for Joe Dumars because he was a prominent general manager for a long time, and the back half of that tenure was just mostly a disaster. So this feels like the sort of thing that a team would have done in, like, 2015, when there was real resistance to things like analytics and, just the modernization of the game, where at that point it, like, kind of made sense that a renegade owner would be like, yeah, we're going to hire Vlade Divac to run our team, and we're going to do things differently than you. I can't believe in 2025 they're still a team thinking this way. And again, I just keep going back to the fact that like the Pelicans are notoriously cheap. Now that the Hornets are like owned by a real ownership group and not Michael Jordan, I think the Pelicans might be the cheapest team in the NBA or one of them. And maybe Joe Dumars just isn't expensive and he's going to cut costs in other areas and like maybe keep Willie Green. I don't know, but I just don't see the rationale for this, right? Like, I don't know what you look at Joe Dumars as and say, like, this is what he brings to the table. I maybe what you say is like, oh, he's a Hall of Famer, but he was a gritty role player type. And maybe he can connect with Zion on that level and like help Zion get into shape and like be committed. I kind of just think Zion is what he is. And my opinion on Zion is that it's never going to happen in New Orleans. I think it might happen with a second team. Maybe we can get into that. But I sort of just think the Zion ship there has failed, and he's going to mostly not be healthy and in the best shape as a Pelican. He was great down the stretch this year, and I remain encouraged that if he's in the right situation, he can still be like an all NBA player. I just don't think with this hire, it's at all likely that the Pelicans are going to be this situation. And I now look around the NBA, and I think if you would have asked either of us like 2 or 3 years ago, we broadly would have said, like, yeah, there aren't that many like stupid teams in the NBA. There aren't that many teams that you look at as like, oh, that's an easy mark. Like we can just call them and like make them make a bad trade. I think a lot of the smart teams are now looking at New Orleans, are now looking at Sacramento with like, is Vlade the Shadow GM there again? Is it Jeremy Lamb? Who's running that team? There's clearly there's some opportunity there to take advantage of some teams right now that are not as well run as the majority of the league. Maybe Chicago is in that group. You could probably take advantage of Nico Harrison's desperation. You can certainly take advantage of Matt Ishbia's desperation. Like there are now it's like a decent sized group of teams now that I see and Daryl Morey and like a few of the other smart long tenured GMs are just looking at and like rubbing their hands together like, oh baby, I can't wait to trade with them. Like couldn't you see in like a year the Pelicans being like, yeah, we traded Trey Murphy for Harrison Barnes and a first round pick because we really needed a culture setter in our locker room or something. Like, I'm really nervous that something like that's going to happen.
I don't know about something quite like that. I would say that if they're going to do something where maybe they just package some of their young players together to get somebody that they're very high on, like some veteran, maybe like an all-star who's kind of on the decline that they think could really
Kevin
push
Durant.
them. They're going to have what's supposed to be the fourth overall pick. If they don't get to number one, what do they do with that? Would they want to play with that to try to get someone that they think could really improve things? I would definitely, if they get the fourth or fifth pick, they'll be in a position to select the point guard. And I feel like if everything stayed the way they are, if Griffin was still there, I would imagine that's what they'd go for. Just get another guard because who knows when DeJounte Murray will come back and what he's going to look like after an injury like that. Maybe they get a little more aggressive now. What if they package that pick with Murray to get like a different all-star type point guard? I don't know. I think what kind of direction they'll take. I think we'll kind of know around draft night. I think we'll know fairly soon just what exactly the plan is. But no, I think we're kind of on the same page as far as we're just very. You made it pretty clear you don't think the Pelicans are heading in a good direction. I think that firing Griffin, I've seen a lot of Pelicans fans say, like they wanted him gone. This might be one of those things where, hey, the grass isn't always greener. So on the other side. So I think I've been defending Griffin all these years. If I could have voted for executive of the year in 2022, so this is the year that they got Murphy and Herb Jones and Jose Alvarado, I had him as my number one guy. I think in that year it was like, Brad Stevens number one for helping the Celtics get to the finals. I'm just like, he really changed the Pelicans' outlook and situation around in 1 year. And he was getting a lot of criticism at that time for missing a lot of draft picks in 2019 and 2020. So yeah, we'll find out soon what's going to happen. Sam, I want to just go over really quickly while I have you on. Without getting into details, do you have any preliminary picks on how the play-in and playoffs will go and how many games? No need to like dissect it, just kind of like quick, like how you think it would go down. And I'm sure you might change your mind later on what those picks might be, but do you have any ideas how it's gonna go?
Yeah, I'm gonna say Warriors Grizzlies make it in the West, and in that order. And I'm gonna say Hawks and Bulls make it in the East. So we can go series by series. Thunder over Grizzlies in 5. I'm just not gonna pick sweeps because I don't want it to come back to me. But if I say 5, just know that I'm probably thinking sweep. So Thunder over Grizzlies in 5. Um, Warriors Rockets is interesting. I think the Warriors win it, but it reminds me a lot of that Kings Warriors series a few years ago, where it's going to be really exciting and there's going to be a lot of drama. So I'll pick Warriors over Rockets in 7. Lakers over Timberwolves. I'm going to say 6. I think the size for Minnesota is going to be a little problematic for the Lakers, but I think Luka has just proven time and time again that when he goes against Gobert in the playoffs, it just goes badly for Gobert. Like, I know the Timberwolves fan and the analytics people are like, oh, Rudy is fine on the perimeter. How dare you suggest that he's going to get hunted? Like, Luka's a different animal. Like, this is not the 8th best shooting guard in the NBA. This is Luka. Luka, if you're anything less than like Bam Adebayo on the perimeter, Luka is going to punish you. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think Gobert and Randall and Nas are just going to struggle against those 5-out Laker lineups. I think they're going to switch on their way to a victory in that series. 4-5 Clippers Nuggets. I'm picking Clippers in 6. I just think the way they've played the last month or so is just they look like the second best team in the West to me. The Nuggets, I wouldn't be surprised if the Nuggets won. Jokic is that good, but with Murray at less than 100% and all the depth problems and the drama, I just don't feel it would be responsible to pick them. The East is pretty straightforward. Celtics and Cavs going to sweep. Not even going to bother with that. I am going to pick Knicks over Pistons in 6. I think the Pistons are going to give them some problems, but I just think there are so many guys on that Pistons team that are one-dimensional that are going to be easier to punish. They're just not going to guard Asar Thompson. They're not going to guard Ron Holland. Malik Beasley, Jalen Brunson is going to hunt him into extinction. And then Pacers Bucks. I kind of just think, look, Giannis is playing incredible, but the rest of that team without Damian Lillard is a mess. And the Pacers, I think they're 32-13 in their last 45 or something like that. Like the Pacers have quietly been very nearly as good as the Celtics and the Cavs for the past like 2-3 months. So I'm going to pick the Pacers to win that series. And my finals pick, boring, it's chalk. It's Thunder over Celtics. You can get into that more if you want, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
All right, so not too many differences at all. Usually when I do these, I've historically been pretty good at picking the first round. Beyond that, I've been pretty off, especially like I think I've gotten the last finals picks wrongs, and not just because like not from necessarily picking the finals teams correctly from this far out. I never have, but like once the finals are set and I have to decide the winner, I think I've been wrong for like the past 5 years each year. Like I guess since the Warriors had their domination, I would always pick them. That was too easy. But in the East, I'll start with them. Play-in, I think Atlanta beats Orlando. I think Chicago beats Miami. And then I think Chicago beats Orlando. Then in Cleveland sweep, Boston sweep, New York in 5. I understand a lot of the excitement in the Pistons. I think a lot of people think like this could be a series where it gets a little too long because the Knicks are just beating themselves. But I think they'll win this in 5. Pacers over Bucks in about, I'd say 6. Cavs over Pacers, Celtics over Knicks, both in about 5. And then Celtics over Cavs in about 6. In the West, right now, I'm slightly leaning Warriors over Grizzlies, but I'm like very 50-50 on that. Just like very, very slight edge to the Warriors because the Grizzlies have just been, on a tailspin. Kings over Mavs, and then Grizzlies over Kings. Thunder sweep over the 8 seed. You got the Warriors beating the Rockets. I think the Rockets will actually win that series in about 6. Then Lakers over Wolves in 5. Clippers over Nuggets in 7. I'm with you. I think a lot of people are trending towards the Clippers right now. That one's very 50-50, but I think just given everything that's going on with the Nuggets right now, also there's some uncertainty on Jamal Murray's knee. I just trust the Clippers a little more. You could say the same thing about Kawhi's knee. It's tended to just completely shut off at this time of year. Clippers sweep over the Clippers. Lakers over Rockets in about 6. Thunder over Lakers in about 5. And I think right now I'm leaning towards a Celtics repeat in 6. I am just keeping an eye on Tatum in the early parts of the playoffs. He's just been sneaky underrated. He's having the best stretch of his career right now. If he can finally translate that to the playoffs, then you can make a case he'd be the best player in the playoffs, and that's generally what it takes to win. There is some concern about Jaylen Brown's knee. Sounds like it's a bone bruise, in which case it mainly needs rest. He did get the injection, which is concerning, but they probably could just give him 3 weeks off. They would get through the first round without him. And if that's enough rest, maybe he'll be good to go. And if that's the case, I just think the Celtics are the best team in the league when it comes to these tight playoff situations.
Yeah, the difference between the Thunder and the Celtics for me right now is that I just have more questions about the Celtics. Jalen being a big one. I'm with you. I think they would get through the first round without really any trouble if they just sat Jalen out. They're not going to need him. I don't think the Celtics are going to play an important playoff game until game 3 against the Knicks. Whatever the first Madison Square Garden game is, that's when they have to start taking it seriously. I don't think that's how they're going to do it. I think teams are really superstitious about this stuff. So I suspect they'll play Jalen, and I'm nervous about the knee injury. Drew Holiday has not been Drew Holiday this year, which makes sense. He's older. He's on the back 9. With Kristaps Porzingis, you just never know, right? He might be fine today, and in 2 weeks, oh no, he's got a calf thing, and he might be okay in a week, or it might linger throughout the playoffs. There are just so many questions there. Whereas I think the Thunder are generally just healthy at this point. They're younger. They didn't go through the full 4-round grind last year. They didn't have as much drama with the Olympics, all that stuff. And even if they do have an injury, they're just deeper. So it's easier for them to get away with it if say Chet Holmgren has to miss 2 games, or Lou Dort is out for half a round or whatever. Whereas I think if the Celtics are playing, maybe not the Knicks, because I think the Knicks are such a bad matchup. On their end, I think the Celtics should beat the Knicks pretty comfortably. If they're playing Cleveland and Porzingis is suddenly out for games 3, 4, and 5, that's DEFCON 1. That's dangerous. Whereas I think the Thunder could get away with being without anybody but Shea for a brief period against pretty much anyone in the West. So I'm just a little bit more comfortable with the Thunder, but Celtics are a fine pick. I think the Cavs are a reasonable pick too. I think we're starting to sleep on them a little bit. Their last month wasn't great, but it didn't need to be great, so who cares?
Okay. No, I'm glad we got those in. I might still change my picks as we get a little closer, see how the play-in shakes out. But that's kind of, I don't think it's going to change too significantly in a large part. That's kind of what I'm feeling. All right. Well, Sam, I think that's all we've got. Thanks for being on again. You guys can follow Sam on Twitter at Sam Quinn CBS. Find all his work on CBS Sports. I assume that in the pipeline, you've got your Joe Dumars review coming out in written form soon.
Yes, I will be writing that as soon as we get off the air. I'll have stuff throughout the play-in this week. I had a story on the Suns drop about 12 minutes ago while we were on the air. So go check that out. I'll have stuff throughout the week. I'll have stuff throughout the playoffs. So read CBSSports.com. We do a lot of good stuff.
All right, guys, make sure to check Sam's work. It's coming out soon. And thank you guys for watching. You guys can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Yossi Goslin. I will have a lot more transactions and cap reaction stuff as transactions happen. You can watch my videos and listen to the audio on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And please subscribe to Third Apron. I am covering every single I'm going to be covering every single team ahead of the offseason, some big picture decisions. I just wrote something about the Sixers and explore some of the worst case scenarios that can happen there. If Embiid and Paul George can't pick things up. And tomorrow I will be doing the Raptors, so stay tuned. I'll be announcing that shortly. Thanks for everyone for watching, and I'll see you